Hello there, students. We're going to start our unit on thriller short stories with one of my favorites, The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. This came out in January of 1843, so you might say, well, it's quite old. Hey, it's a classic, and it's very good, and if you talk to your parents about it, they've probably read it as well. We're going to pause at some points during the reading to reflect, and maybe I might ask some rhetorical questions to you. I might go over some vocabulary terms. I might explain a little bit more of what's going on. But what you should have right now, students, is you should have your copy of The Telltale Heart. And all I want you to do is follow along with me as I read. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all the things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken! I observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object? There was none. Passion? There was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now at this point, you fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. So let's pause and reflect. So far we have an intro, and clearly we have a person who's claiming not to be a madman, but sort of sounds like he is. And he's made a decision that he's going to take the life of the old man. We don't know who this old man is yet. Why does he want to take his life? Because of this eye that the old man has that he claims is driving him insane nearly, but he claims he's not insane. So it's kind of interesting so far. Let's keep reading. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I'd turn the latch of his door and open it, oh, so gently. And then when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber, and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph, to think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back up, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close-fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily, steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped up the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, although chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise. When he had turned in the bed, his fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with all these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with its black shadow before him and enveloped him. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. So let's pause and reflect. So first of all, students, a lot of the vocab terms are at the bottom of the page. I certainly hope that you are, every time there's a word that has a footnote and you're kind of confused by its meaning, please look at the footnote at the bottom of the page. So here's what we know now. For 7 nights, this crazy man peered into the old man's room just to look at him, but he did nothing. And then the next morning, he'd greet him as if they were good friends. So now on this 8th night, he's actually going to try to commit this deed. And he opens the door, but there's a creak, and the old man hears it and sits up. And he sits up for an hour, and there's nobody moving. And we're going to see what happens next. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the darned spot. And now, have I not told you that what you mistake for my madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of the drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I had tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. So let's pause and reflect. So he rushed into the room and he did the deed, and he put a mattress over the old man and he put a hand over his heart, and the heart was no longer beating. Let's continue. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer. When I described the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body, the night waned, and I worked hastily but in silence. But of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the floor of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out. No stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha ha! When I made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, then came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart. For what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what I had to fear, I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot which reposed the corpse of the victim. So let's pause and reflect. So he has put the body underneath the floorboards, but the police have arrived. The police heard something, and they're there to investigate. And this madman is so confident in his crime, he's pulled in some chairs, and he's going to talk to the police officers right over the floorboards where the body is. We'll see what happens next here. Let's continue reading. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But they still sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound. Much sound, a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. What could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair open at which I had been upon sitting, and grated it upon the boards. But the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possibly they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder! 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 Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. All right, let's finish up here. So, let me ask a rhetorical question right now. What led this madman to admitting his crime to the police? I'll give you a moment to think about it. Well, let me follow up with this question, students. And I would throw myself in this, especially when I was younger, I would throw myself in this, this gamut here. How many of you have ever done something that you know you could get away with, but there's a feeling inside of you that tells you, you know what I did, I have to say it. I have to say what I did. That's the feeling that the madman had. He was driven insane by what he thought he heard, but really there was no sound. So a lot of times we have an inner thought that tells us, what we just did was wrong, and it leads us to action. And I can certainly recall many times, growing up where, hey, what I did wasn't right. I got my hand caught in the cookie jar, so to speak. And I admitted, hey, what I did was wrong. And in life, we all will go through stuff like that where, we're all going to make mistakes in life. But, the right thing to do is when you make a mistake is to try to correct it as soon as possible and make right with it. If you've wronged somebody, make right with that person. So that's my take on it. But I hope you enjoyed this story. It's a classic. Once again, this is when I sent an email a few days ago, I said this is a generational story. Basically every student who's gone through the 6th grade has read this story. In fact, the copy I'm reading is from my 6th grade textbook. We were able to keep our, the soft cover books you have, students, we were able to keep ours, and this is from that. And I kept this story because I enjoyed it when I was a child, and I've enjoyed reading to students, and the students over the years, I've read it every year, I've taught here, the students over the years have really, really enjoyed it too. So what you'll do next is you will take the AR test. So log into AR, and if you just type in Telltale Heart, it's spelled for you on the screen, by Edgar Allan Poe, the test will come up. And if you have any questions, let me know. Also, if you are interested, there is a video on YouTube of a Vincent Price, who is a famous voice actor. He does a dramatic acting of this Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, and you might be interested in that. So if you're interested in that, feel free to go to YouTube and type in Telltale Heart Vincent Price, and it'll come up. If you have any questions about the story, let me know. Love to answer them. Hope you enjoyed it. Tomorrow, we will do another one of my favorites, The Monkey's Paw. We'll see ya.